Imagine a United States Marine Corps HIMARS battery, deeply concealed within the dense, triple-canopy jungle of a remote, highly contested island in the Philippine Sea. For the past 72 hours, this single battery has been wreaking absolute havoc on the advancing vessels of the People's Liberation Army Navy. They have been executing flawless shoot-and-scoot maneuvers, driving out of the tree line, elevating their launch pods, unleashing devastating salvos of precision-guided rockets, and vanishing back into the foliage before the enemy's counter-battery radar can calculate a firing solution. They are the ultimate asymmetric apex predators. They are holding the line. But then the launch pod clicks empty. The digital displays in the armored cap flash a warning that every artilleryman dreads. They are out of ammunition. The battery commander radios the Expeditionary Logistics Hub, requesting an immediate resupply of guided multiple launch rocket systems, the legendary GMLRS. He expects a C-130 Hercules to drop a pallet within the hour, or a fast-moving logistics vessel to arrive on the beach under the cover of darkness. The response he gets over the encrypted radio net is chilling. The resupply isn't coming. The commander is informed that the massive, unarmored cargo ship carrying the resupply pods from the port of San Diego was intercepted by a Chinese Type 093 nuclear attack submarine 2,000 miles east of Guam. The ship is currently at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. He is told that the Lockheed Martin factories in Camden, Arkansas, are running 24/7, but they are completely backlogged trying to supply the European theater, the Middle East, and the Pacific simultaneously. He is told that the United States military, the most technologically advanced, heavily funded fighting force in the history of human civilization, has simply run out of bullets. For decades, the strategic planners in Washington, D.C. operated under the comforting, arrogant illusion of the endless arsenal. They believed that American industry could seamlessly, effortlessly outproduce any adversary on Earth. But the brutal, grinding realities of the 2020s shattered that illusion permanently. The Pentagon looked at the sheer volume of precision munitions being consumed daily in global flashpoints and realized a terrifying mathematical truth. In a high-intensity war against an industrialized superpower like China, the United States cannot supply the free world alone. Furthermore, relying on a 10,000-mile, highly vulnerable maritime umbilical cord to ship missiles from the American Midwest to the front lines of the Indo-Pacific is a strategic suicide pact. To survive the coming storm, the United States had to do the unthinkable. They had to export their most closely guarded weapon blueprints. They had to build a backup generator for the arsenal of democracy. They looked across the Pacific to the vast, resource-rich, untouchable sanctuary of the Australian continent. And they decided to turn it into a weapons factory. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are executing a forensic deep dive analysis into the most critical, yet frequently ignored vulnerability of the Western Alliance, the brutal mathematics of magazine depth. Here is the thesis for this episode. Wars are not won by the nation that invents the best prototype missile. Wars are won by the nation that can mass-produce that missile, ship it to the front line, fire it, and replace it faster than the enemy can shoot it down. Logistics is the anvil upon which military strategy is forged. And right now, the Anglosphere is building a massive secondary anvil in the Southern Hemisphere. If you are beginning to understand why the true outcome of modern great power competition is not decided by diplomatic posturing, but by the relentless output of munitions factories, the processing of raw energetic materials, and the unsentimental realities of supply chain warfare, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We strip away the political rhetoric to bring you the cold, kinetic realities of how the free world actually builds, sustains, and deters. Your support ensures we can keep delivering this level of uncompromising strategic analysis. For years, the Australian Defence Force operated under the assumption that if a major war broke out, they could simply pick up the phone, call the Pentagon, and wait for a shipment of American missiles to arrive. The $21 billion Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance (GWEO) enterprise marks the violent death of that assumption. We are going to break down the empty magazines, the terrifying supply chain bottleneck that forced America to share its secrets. We are going to explore the Port Wakefield Vanguard, the historic reality of March 2026, as the first GMLRS missiles roll off an Australian assembly line. We will analyze the tip-to-tail Sovereign Shield, how Australia is building the capacity to forge these weapons from raw chemicals to finished rockets. And finally, we will look at the interchangeable war machine, how this massive industrial pivot ensures that a Chinese naval blockade cannot starve the Allied forces in the Pacific. Let us begin by confronting the uncomfortable truth about the American military-industrial complex, and the crisis that forced the alliance to adapt: the mathematics of exhaustion. To truly comprehend the magnitude of the strategic shift occurring in the Australian outback today, we must first analyze the catastrophic industrial failures that plagued the West over the last few years. Following the end of the Cold War, the defense industries of the United States and its allies underwent a massive, ruthless consolidation. The sprawling network of government-owned, contractor-operated ammunition plants was shuttered or sold off. The prevailing corporate philosophy became just-in-time manufacturing. Why spend billions of taxpayer dollars to stockpile tens of thousands of missiles in a bunker where they will sit for 20 years and eventually expire? The financial analysts argued that it was much more efficient to keep the production lines running at a bare minimum, producing just enough to replace the munitions used in peacetime training exercises. This hyper-efficient, lean manufacturing model was perfectly suited for low-intensity counterinsurgency operations in the Middle East. It was an unmitigated disaster for high-intensity, state-on-state industrial warfare. When the conflict in Ukraine erupted and subsequently the crises in the Middle East, the world witnessed the true burn rate of modern combat. The consumption of munitions reached levels that defied comprehension. Ukrainian and Russian forces were firing thousands of 155mm artillery shells every single day. The highly touted HIMARS systems were consuming GMLRS rocket pods faster than the logistical trains could deliver them. The Pentagon opened its massive strategic reserves and began shipping weapons overseas. But within months, a creeping panic set in. The reserves were draining at an unsustainable rate. When the Department of Defense went to the prime contractors, titans like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics, and ordered them to instantly quadruple production, they hit a brick wall. You cannot simply flip a switch on a missile factory. The supply chains were incredibly brittle. The United States relied on a single highly specialized factory to produce the solid rocket motor casings. They relied on a handful of aging chemical plants, like the Holston Army Ammunition Plant in Tennessee, to produce the specialized high explosives, like RDX and HMX, required for the warheads. The microchips, the thermal batteries, the guidance fins, every single component was bottlenecked. The facility in Camden, Arkansas, responsible for assembling the HIMARS and the GMLRS rockets, was pushed to its absolute maximum capacity. The American industrial base was maxed out just trying to sustain a regional land war in Europe. Strategic planners in Washington and Canberra looked at these production charts, overlaid them onto a simulated conflict against the People's Republic of China in the Indo-Pacific, and realized they were staring at a mathematical impossibility: the 10,000-mile target. The crisis of production was compounded by the nightmare of geography. If a war breaks out in Europe, the United States can load munitions onto a transport plane in Delaware, fly across the uncontested Atlantic Ocean, and land safely in Germany or Poland a few hours later. Alternatively, they can load massive cargo ships that sail across relatively safe waters, docking in secure European ports before the munitions are moved by rail to the front lines. The Pacific theater offers no such luxury. It is defined by the tyranny of distance. To supply Allied forces in the first island chain, Taiwan, Japan, or the Philippines, the United States must move thousands of tons of highly explosive cargo across the largest body of water on the planet. From the naval magazines in San Diego or the ammunition depots in Hawthorne, Nevada, these weapons must be loaded onto military sealift command vessels. These vessels are slow. They are unarmored. And they must sail 10,000 miles across an ocean that is actively contested by the world's largest navy. In a high-intensity conflict, the People's Liberation Army Navy plan will not simply sit back and allow American resupply ships to sail unmolested. They will deploy their expanding fleet of Type 093 and Type 095 nuclear attack submarines into the deep trenches of the Central Pacific. They will utilize their long-range H-6K strategic bombers to launch anti-ship cruise missiles. Every single cargo ship ferrying GMLRS rockets and 155mm artillery shells from the American mainland becomes a high-value, highly vulnerable target. If China successfully executes a strategy of maritime interdiction, the Allied forces operating in the Western Pacific will rapidly exhaust their magazines. A HIMARS launcher without a rocket pod is just a very expensive, heavily armored truck. An F-35 stealth fighter without a JSMER cruise missile is just a flying camera. The Western Alliance recognized that relying on a 10,000-mile heavily contested umbilical cord to sustain a war effort was a fatal flaw in their grand strategy. To deter China, the free world required a massive, heavily industrialized, untouchable secondary arsenal located firmly within the Indo-Pacific theater. They needed the second forge. And Australia stepped up to build it, breaking the American monopoly. In the highly classified, fiercely protective world of international defense manufacturing, nations do not share their most lethal blueprints lightly. The United States has historically guarded the manufacturing processes of its precision-guided munitions with an iron fist, fearful of industrial espionage, technological leakage, and the loss of sovereign control over its most advanced weapon systems. But the sheer scale of the magazine depth crisis forced the Pentagon to break its own rules. In a monumental, historic shift of policy, the United States Congress and the Department of Defense authorized the export of the technical data packages, the manufacturing schematics, and the highly classified integration protocols for the Guided Multiple Launch Rocket System, GMLRS. They authorized Lockheed Martin to physically transfer the production line technology to the Australian continent. Fast forward to the immediate, kinetic reality of today, March 2026. At a newly constructed, state-of-the-art defense manufacturing facility located at Port Wakefield in South Australia, history was quietly made. The very first GMLRS missiles, assembled entirely on Australian soil, rolled off the production line. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is a geopolitical earthquake. It marks the very first time in the history of the weapon system that a GMLRS rocket has been manufactured outside of the United States. The Port Wakefield facility, operating under the umbrella of the Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance (GWEO) enterprise, represents the physical manifestation of the AUKUS and ANZUS alliances. It is a highly secure, climate-controlled, technologically immaculate environment. Inside, Australian aerospace engineers, ordnance specialists, and technicians, trained directly by their American counterparts, are executing the complex, microscopic tolerances required to marry the solid rocket motors with the high explosive warheads and the precision GPS inertial navigation guidance sections. By standing up this facility, Australia has instantly relieved a massive pressure point on the American defense industrial base. The rockets assembled in South Australia do not need to be shipped across 10,000 miles of contested ocean. They are already in the theater. They are ready to be loaded onto the backs of Australian Army HIMARS trucks, or handed directly to United States Marines deployed in the region. The 4,000 missile blueprint. But the milestone achieved in March 2026 is only the opening salvo of a much larger, overwhelmingly aggressive industrial blueprint. The Australian government is not content with a boutique, low-volume assembly plant. The GWEO enterprise is a $21 billion juggernaut designed for massive, relentless scale. The strategic roadmap dictates a rapid, exponential spool-up of the Port Wakefield facility and surrounding infrastructure. The goal is to aggressively ramp up production capacity to churn out an astonishing 4,000 GMLRS missiles annually by the year 2029. 4,000 precision-guided rockets a year. That represents a volume of fire that fundamentally alters the tactical calculus of the Indo-Pacific. It guarantees that the Australian Defence Force will possess the magazine depth required to sustain continuous, devastating high-volume fire missions against adversary forces, ships, and logistical nodes for months on end without ever needing to place an emergency phone call to Washington. And the ambition does not stop with the GMLRS. The GMLRS is a formidable weapon, boasting a highly accurate range of over 70 kilometers. But the vast distances of the Pacific demand weapons that can reach further, hit harder, and travel faster. The manufacturing infrastructure being perfected right now in South Australia is explicitly designed to be forward-compatible. The immediate next phase of the GWEO roadmap is to transition the Australian production lines to manufacture the Precision Strike Missile, PRSM. The PRSM is the next-generation, apex predator of the HIMARS arsenal. It is significantly slimmer than the legacy ATACMS, allowing a HIMARS launcher to carry 2 PRSMs in a single pod instead of one. More importantly, it features an advanced, multi-mode seeker head capable of hunting moving maritime targets, and it boasts a staggering operational range in excess of 500 kilometers. When the Port Wakefield facility begins churning out the PRSM, Australia will possess the sovereign capacity to mass-produce land-based, anti-ship ballistic missiles capable of locking down the critical maritime choke points of the Indonesian archipelago entirely from the safety of the Australian mainland. We are not just building bullets. We are building the ultimate Pacific shield, forging the complete weapon. When the news of the Australian missile manufacturing initiative first broke, skeptics and geopolitical analysts were quick to dismiss it. They argued that Australia was merely building a screwdriver plant. In defense industry terminology, this is known as a completely knocked-down (CKD) operation. It implies that all the complex, high-tech components, the rocket motors, the explosives, the guidance chips, are still manufactured in the United States, shipped in crates to Australia, and Australian workers merely bolt the pieces together. If this were true, the strategic vulnerability would remain. A Chinese naval blockade could simply sink the ship carrying the rocket motors, and the Australian factory would grind to a halt within weeks. But the strategic planners in Canberra and Washington understood this fatal flaw. The $21 billion GWEO enterprise is explicitly designed to eradicate it. Australia is not building a screwdriver plant. They are actively, aggressively constructing a tip-to-tail sovereign manufacturing capability. This means owning the entire supply chain from the raw chemical precursors to the final, painted missile casing. To achieve this, the Australian government is injecting massive capital into the deep, underlying chemistry and metallurgy of weapon production. You cannot build a missile without energetic materials. Australia possesses world-class, government-owned munitions facilities at Mulwala in New South Wales and Benalla in Victoria. These facilities are undergoing radical modernization and expansion. Mulwala is the chemical heart of the operation. It is being upgraded to produce the massive quantities of specialized propellants required for solid rocket motors, as well as the high-end, military-grade high explosives, like RDX and HMX formulations, required for the lethal warheads. Simultaneously, the Australian industrial base is standing up the capability to cast and forge the actual steel and titanium casings for the rocket motors. They are investing heavily in the domestic production of the complex thermal batteries that power the missile's internal computers during flight. By building the capacity to source the chemicals, mix the propellants, cast the explosives, and forge the steel natively, Australia is ensuring that the production of GMLRS and PRSM missiles is completely immune to global supply chain shocks. The blockade-proof arsenal. This tip-to-tail capability fundamentally alters the strategic geometry of a Pacific war. It creates the blockade-proof arsenal. Imagine a scenario where the geopolitical situation deteriorates into a total high-intensity conflict. The People's Liberation Army Navy executes a massive, coordinated strategy to sever the sea lines of communication, SLOCs, across the Pacific. They deploy their nuclear attack submarines, their carrier strike groups, and their long-range bombers to create an impenetrable blockade stretching from the first island chain all the way to Hawaii. In this scenario, the flow of American munitions cargo ships across the Pacific is completely halted. The U.S. forces trapped inside the first island chain are isolated, fighting desperately with the magazines they have on hand. But behind the blockade, the Australian continent remains a pulsing, untouchable fortress of heavy industry. Because the GWEO enterprise has established sovereign production, the factories in Port Wakefield, Mulwala, and Benalla do not stop running. They do not care that the Pacific Ocean has been closed to shipping. They are sourcing their raw materials natively. The assembly lines continue to run hot, churning out thousands of precision-guided rockets, 155mm artillery shells, and long-range strike weapons. The Australian Defence Force can continuously, endlessly reload its launchers. They can sustain a massive, relentless campaign of long-range fires to punch holes in the Chinese blockade, sinking adversary ships attempting to push south, and projecting power deep into the contested archipelagos. This is the strategic depth that Beijing fears above all else. They can blockade an island, but they cannot blockade a self-sufficient, heavily industrialized continent. By establishing a sovereign, tip-to-tail weapons forge, Australia ensures that the southern flank of the free world can never be starved of ammunition. They guarantee that the fight will continue, no matter what happens in the North Pacific. The interchangeable war machine. The establishment of the Australian missile manufacturing base is not an act of isolationism. It is not Australia pulling up the drawbridge and focusing solely on its own defense. It is the exact opposite. It is the ultimate act of alliance integration. The weapons rolling off the assembly line at Port Wakefield in March 2026 are not Australian variants. They are not slightly modified, proprietary systems that require specialized software or unique launchers. They are mathematically, chemically, and digitally identical to the weapons produced in Camden, Arkansas. This achieves the holy grail of coalition warfare: absolute interchangeability. In modern combat, friction is the enemy. If a British ship uses a different radio frequency than an American jet, or an Australian launcher requires a different software patch to fire a missile, that friction costs lives and loses battles. By manufacturing 100% interoperable munitions, Australia creates a seamless, borderless logistical web. Consider the United States Marine Rotational Force Darwin, MRFD. Every year, thousands of U.S. Marines deploy to the Northern Territory, bringing their HIMARS batteries with them. In a time of crisis, If those Marines are ordered to deploy rapidly into the contested islands of the South China Sea or the Indonesian archipelago, they do not have to wait for a sluggish supply ship to arrive from San Diego carrying their ammunition. They can simply drive their HIMARS trucks to a depot in South Australia or the Northern Territory, load pods of GMLRS rockets manufactured by Australian workers, and deploy immediately into the combat zone. The American targeting computers will recognize the Australian-built missiles instantly. The integration is flawless. Plug-and-play logistics in the most lethal sense of the term. This interchangeability provides the Pentagon with a massive, unprecedented level of strategic redundancy. The United States military knows that even if their own domestic factories are overwhelmed, or their trans-Pacific supply lines are severed, they have a secure, highly capable, heavily industrialized ally in the Southern Hemisphere that can physically sustain the fight, outproducing the adversary. For too long, the narrative surrounding the rise of China was one of inevitable, unstoppable industrial dominance. The Chinese Communist Party leveraged its massive population, its state-subsidized factories, and its relentless focus on mass production to build an intimidating military machine. They banked on the assumption that the West was too fractured, too bureaucratic, and too deindustrialized to respond in kind. The $21 billion GWEO enterprise, and the physical reality of missiles rolling off the line at Port Wakefield today, proves that assumption is a catastrophic miscalculation. Authoritarian regimes respect only one thing: power. And in the context of modern warfare, power is measured by industrial mass. It is measured by your capacity to forge steel, mix explosives, print microchips, and deliver overwhelming violence to the target faster than the enemy can absorb it. The Anglosphere is proving that it has not forgotten how to build. We are waking the sleeping giant of heavy industry. By turning Australia into the second forge of the free world, the United States and its allies have fundamentally altered the mathematics of deterrence in the Pacific. We have eliminated the single point of failure. We have destroyed the vulnerability of the 10,000-mile supply line. We are sending a brutal, uncompromising message to Beijing. If you choose to initiate a conflict in the Indo-Pacific, you will not just be fighting the stockpiles we have on hand. You will be fighting a continuously running, blockade-proof, hyper-efficient continental war factory. You will be fighting an alliance that can endlessly reload, endlessly out-innovate, and endlessly outproduce you. The magazines of the free world will not run dry. The forge is lit. The production lines are running hot. And the ultimate Pacific shield is being built right now, in the red dirt of the Australian outback. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you believe that Australia's push for sovereign missile manufacturing is enough to secure the Indo-Pacific? Or is the $21 billion investment moving too slowly to counter the immediate threat of the Chinese military buildup? Let us know your tactical assessment in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay relentless, and we'll see you in the next one.